So we are discussing various elements relating to Passover Seders, but there, and Stephen just asked the question, suppose you don't do everything. And I don't think I've ever attended a Seder where they do absolutely everything. Is it the technical terminology? There'd be two technical terminologies. One will make sense to all of you. Is it kosher? And then the actual technical technology is, are you yotze? Have you fulfilled your obligation for observing a Passover Seder? And, if you're a traditional Jew, um, there's all kinds of things starting Thursday, starting tomorrow. You're supposed to do the search for the chametz tomorrow, and the fast of the firstborn. Firstborn males are supposed to fast. Um, and this year there's all kinds of rule changes because the Seder falls on Saturday night. So there's a lot of rules. You're supposed to sell your chametz. There's a lot of rules. So the question is, are you okay if you don't observe all the rules?
Now the
And I
question,
would say a traditional Jew would say, no, you really should observe all the rules.
the
Nobody gets
Speaking
it
of
perfect.
rules, do we want to say the prayer?
Oh,
yeah, the
yes, thank
blessing.
you. Baruch atah Adonai
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam
haolam
asher
asher
b'rishanu
b'rishanu
b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you for reminding me. Yes.
Rabbi,
Oh, hold on, Alan. Alan, you were raising your hand.
I thought there were a couple of points, maybe two, in the Haggadah, which specifically calls out to say you have fulfilled or obligated to do this thing.
Yes. So what they're doing is they are quoting from the Mishnah. There's a place where you quote, if my memory is correct, Rabbi Gamliel says, if you haven't done this, 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 and this, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. But that doesn't let you off the hook for doing the other 47 things you're supposed to do. But they're actually quoting from the Mishnah. And if you actually study, if you study the idea of a Passover Seder, you will find almost nothing in the Bible. There's a discussion of sacrificing a Paschal lamb, which is called a Pesach, and of inviting people. And there's, of course, a historical discussion of the first, you could call it the first Seder, but the first, when the night of the 10th plague, the slaying of the firstborn. But there's really not much in there in the Bible about what you're supposed to do. And so if you want to know what you're supposed to do, it's all in the Talmud. And if you look at the Mishnah, I think there's a tractate of Talmud called Pesachim, and the Mishnah, I'm pretty sure it's chapter 10 of the Mishnah, lays out the basic structure of the Seder, some of which we still do, some of which we don't do. Jerry.
Thank you. How true is it that the Last Supper that Jesus had was a Passover meal?
So I would say, I will answer it. I will answer it very carefully. I will say there are references in the New Testament, I think in the Gospel of John, to Jesus' Last Supper being a Seder, but I would say the preponderance of scholarly opinion is that it was not a Seder. And there's, I reread some articles, and there's always articles in it's the Biblical Archaeological Review about this, which speculates that the Seder as we know it today didn't exist in the time of Jesus.
Oh.
And
Okay.
and then the timing also is very difficult because the Last Supper is the day before Jesus' execution, and if it were a Seder, the next day would be a holiday, a holy day, Passover, and you wouldn't, certainly if the Jews had any role in it, they wouldn't be executing anyone on a holy day. So I would say the preponderance of scholarly opinion is that it is not a Seder, but many people, Jews and non-Jews alike, believe it to be a Seder because it's a ritual meal. There's wine and there's some kind of bread, and people are posing for a picture.
In the picture, the bread is flat like matzah.
I don't know what picture you're referring to, but I guarantee you that photography did not exist in those days.
Well, in Italy, when you see the
Leonardo da Vinci painting of the Last Supper is what she's referring to.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, yeah. I
Right.
don't recall the bread being flat, but that wouldn't change my opinion one way or the other.
Oh,
Erwin.
Actually, that it's not, because I remember reading once that the roles are arranged in the painting in the way that spells out that corresponds to the music for something. I don't remember what it's the music for, but anyway, somebody knows that the way he arranged what they described as roles, which would imply not flat,
Okay. So
out
yeah, I have no clue.
superimpose musical scales on it.
But I would say interesting, but not technically relevant. Erwin.
I just want to say that I think Pesach is the only Jewish holiday which we really physically and spiritually prepare for, because as you say, this year you're going to start Thursday and goes into Friday and everything. And so it's the same thing, I think, when Moses went up to Sinai and the Jews were waiting for him to come down. I think maybe that's a midrash that they prepare themselves to accept the Torah. The Pesach is also that, I mean, my wife started working on the dinner, and my two girls were involved, and the smell of the food and everything is so the crescendo was the dinner itself and reading the Haggadah.
Okay. So
That's what
I
I'm saying.
I would absolutely agree with you, and it actually points to another element of Passover. And actually, I should really call it Pesach, because the whole subject of this article, I'm not even sure we'll get to the article, but the whole subject of the article is, when did we start using the term Passover? And is Passover a good translation of the Hebrew word Pesach? So I'll try and use the term Pesach. But on Pesach, there are far more stringent rules, certainly stringent rules of kashrut, than any other time. One would argue that preparing for Rosh Hashanah is certainly the month of it, the entire month of Elul, you're preparing for it. But that doesn't keep people cleaning the house, because the issue with one of the laws of being kosher on Passover is you're not allowed to own any chametz or have it in your house.
Right.
So there's a cleaning, which in some communities started Purim. A long time before Passover. I often quote, Sonia, who told me that in Casablanca, now they had maids doing this, but they would take all the furniture from the house outside the house and put it on the lawn. And so they could do a more effective job of cleaning the house. And they would even repaint areas of the house that needed repainting. And I think she once told me that in some cases they would even empty a mattress and restuff it for fear that crumbs might have fallen in the mattress. Let me comment on one other element of Passover kashrut, which is important. And that is that, generally speaking, the laws of kashrut are somewhat forgiving. And there's a rule of 1/60th. So you're making a beef stew and a drop of milk falls into the beef stew. Does that render the beef stew unkosher? The answer is no. As long as the volume of the milk compared to the meat is less than 1/60th by volume. A fly falls into the beef stew. A fly is not kosher. Do you have to throw out the entire beef stew? No, as long as it's less than 1/60th. So according to the laws of kashrut on Passover, any amount of chametz is not allowable. So there's even a formula you say where you pronounce all chametz that might have survived your search through the house null and void. And then, of course, the Ashkenazim go overboard even more by having a whole other category of foods called kitniot, which are, beans and so on, rice, and say because you might be confused with chametz, or you might have a sack that had rice in it. Rice is not a problem. Rice is not chametz, but it looks a lot like wheat, and there may be a few wheat grains in there. That's a problem. You're probably familiar with matzah shmura, which is
Yeah.
this, hand-baked matzah. The word shmura means guarded. And basically the idea of matzah shmura is from the time the wheat is harvested, it's placed under rabbinic seal in a watertight place to ensure there's no water in it. It doesn't come in contact with any water, and until it's actually mixed with water, and then it has to be fully cooked within 18 minutes, which is why we have perforations in machine-baked matzah. And there's a lot of other stringencies in the Ashkenazi world which don't exist in the Sephardic world.
Can you see this, Rabbi?
It's a box of
Yes, about Shmura. Yes. Yep.
I have that too.
Alan.
So you're using the word laws, and I agree from what I know that there's more things we're supposed to do for Passover. There are things they're supposed to do for the other festivals also,
Yes,
right?
of course.
But it's much smaller. But my real question has to do with customs. So the kidneyot, to my knowledge, which we Ashkenazim always believed that was important, is a custom, though it's not a law. Correct?
Among the Ashkenazim, it's a law.
It is.
Yeah. Yes.
Who defines a law versus a custom?
Your rabbi.
My rabbi.
The rabbi. Yeah.
I mean, and probably in the Shulchan Aruch, because in the Shulchan Aruch it's written for Sephardic Jews, and then along comes it's called the Rima, which is a gloss for the Ashkenazi Jews. But there are different laws. It's not just a custom. It has the force. Put it this way: it may have come as a custom, but it now has the force of law among Ashkenazi Jews. Wearing a yarmulke probably started as a custom, but it now, I would say, has the force of law among traditional Jews.
But the practice of Reform synagogues, and I understand in general conservative synagogues, they have made the public aware the kidneyot is not a mandatory practice.
I would say that's true in Reform to the extent that any ritual practice is not mandatory. In the conservative movement, it was only a few years ago that they allowed kitniot, and the reason was that it was dividing families. And actually, we have this going on right now with our family. We have Sephardim and we have Ashkenazim coming to our Seder, and there is a traditional kind of beans soup that is traditional in Morocco. And Sonia's sister asked, is she making it? And Sonia said no, because we have a couple of basically folks that have married into the family who are Ashkenazim, and she was concerned that that would offend them. Interestingly, we don't have a set of Passover dishes. There's a lot of other things that we're not doing which are traditional. But I would say the conservative movement only recently ruled that kitniot is okay.
That's right.
And the Orthodox in the Ashkenazi world have never gone along with that. Stephen.
Okay. First, I think that keeping your head covered now is now a law, but doing it with a yarmulke is still a custom. Because I've seen Orthodox people, specifically Chabad people, if they're wearing a hat over a yarmulke.
Oh, yeah. That's what I meant. But
to put on somebody else's head and so they have just the hat left on their own.
When I said yarmulke, I meant keep having your head covered.
Okay.
If you try and walk into a conservative or Orthodox synagogue without covering your head, you will be corrected.
Okay.
In clear terms.
Now,
yeah.
You
okay.
said that. Okay. You went over the difference between chametz and ordinary non-kosher stuff in terms of whether it can be a little bit or it has to be nothing. Kid a note, does in those worlds where it is observed or when it was observed more widely, could a trace of it fall in, or was it absolutely none, like with chametz?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I would guess it would be in equal stringency, but I really don't know the answer. It's a very good question.
Is the Jewish cleaning for Passover the origin of the custom of spring cleaning that has extended beyond Judaism?
I doubt it. I don't know, but I doubt it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions before we dive into an article? Okay. Ellen, you still have your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, here we go. Let's see how this works. Okay, you can see the article, I trust.
Yes.
Okay, so it's a long article. I'm going to skim a little bit because I think the beginning of the article is a little repetitive. So the questions being raised is why Passover, on the true meaning of Pesach. By the way, if you don't know, one of the ways of writing a guttural chet is to put a dot under an H in case you ever come across that in scholarly writing. There's a couple other things like that too. Okay. So many of us commonly refer to our favorite spring holiday as Passover. This is reinforced by the passage in the Haggadah that has been imprinted in our minds by years of recitation. The Passover sacrifice that our ancestors ate during the time of the temple. What reason did they did so? Because the Blessed Holy One passed over, Pesach, our fathers' houses in Egypt, as it is said, you shall say it is a Passover offering to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians with a plague, and he saved our houses, and the people bowed and prostrated themselves. By the way, I want to point out that when I always talk about this until I read this article, I always said Passover, the word Pesach, really has two meanings. One is the name given to the Paschal offering, what we say in English as the Paschal offering, the lamb that you sacrifice, or did sacrifice in those days, and also to the verb pasach, meaning to pass over. And now this article is actually related to the second of those questions. And this also is interesting. The English word Passover is an outlier. Other languages typically translate the Hebrew word Pesach. I can't read all of these words. The one in Spanish is Pascua.
Italian.
And by the way, Pascua is also the Spanish word for Easter.
Yes.
Because certainly in Christian thought, too bad Jim isn't here. In Christian thought, Jesus is the Paschal Lamb. So we have that connection. But is Passover a good translation for Pesach? What is the basis for the translation? So Exodus 12:13. In Exodus, in preparation for the first Passover, the Israelites are instructed to slaughter a lamb and smear its blood on the lintels and doorposts of their house. And there's the Hebrew. And
what are lentils?
The lintels, probably the correct way of pronouncing it. Thank
Lentils,
you.
yes.
And the Hebrew is Pesach.
What does the word mean?
What does the word mean?
Yeah.
I think it's the
door frame.
Hold on. I believe, I could be wrong about this, that the doorposts are the vertical elements, and the horizontal element at the top of the door is a lintel. Beth is shaking her head, yes. So, and she is a linguistics, the linguistics authority in the group. So I'll guess that's right. So it's the text says Pasachti alechem, I will pass over you. And if you look at all of the translations, or these translations, King James Version, the New Revised Standard, New Jewish Publication Society, they all use this phrase, I will pass over you. Yeah, Les.
This may be a dumb question, but is the original Passover, the one we're talking about, is it a historical fact or is it myth? What is it?
Let me answer this question precisely. The earliest archaeological evidence we have for anything in the Bible is in the time of King David, which is going to be about 300 years or so, 300 years after this.
Okay.
So we have a lot of Bible from creation to Adam and Eve to the patriarchs to the servitude in Egypt to the Passover story. There is no evidence for the historicity of any of those elements. I would describe this as our sacred myth. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I would describe it as our sacred myth. There was one of my colleagues, I think it was David Wolpe, who was the senior rabbi of an LA conservative synagogue. 1 year at Passover, maybe he wrote an article of either for the Jewish Journal or for the LA Times or something. When he made a simple statement, and the simple statement was, there is no archaeological evidence for anything relating to the Exodus. Okay? That's a simple statement, and it's true. He didn't say it didn't happen, but he caught a lot of criticism for making that statement. So I'm going to go through, Alan, people that have their hand raised. Jerry, then Stephen, then Alan.
I read or was told, I can't remember, that the slaves, the Hebrew slaves that were in Egypt, did not build the pyramids like Cecil B. DeMille had.
So this Cecil B. DeMille, the biblical text doesn't say they built pyramids. It says they built cities. But that's the biblical text. There is no hard archaeological evidence for any of it. Stephen.
Okay. In Egypt, there is archaeological evidence of something that says Israel has been destroyed completely. His seed is gone forever, or something like that.
Yes, it's called the Merneptah Stela.
Now,
go ahead.
Possible explanation for this, since obviously there are still Jews, is that it's referring to another group and not the Israelites. But another interesting possible explanation is that at the crossing of the sea, that when the sea parted and we went through on dry land and then the water flowed back and drowned people, that they didn't know we had made it across and all the way the other side before the water flowed back. The Egyptians thought that we had drowned in the sea. And that could be what it's referring to, in which case it would be the earliest archaeological evidence of the Exodus, except that it's entirely possible.
But it just talks about the Merneptah Stela is a record of a pharaoh Merneptah, and he lists all the peoples that he conquered. He's bragging about it. And I've never actually tracked this down, but I always wonder, how do they know it's Israel? And we know the Egyptian alphabet is phonetic. So I think it corresponds to Yisrael. I'm actually guessing about that. But it doesn't discuss the Exodus. It just discusses the defeat of the Israelite people by Egypt. So it is some evidence, and it's important evidence. There's other hints. There's some great articles which we reviewed maybe a year or two ago, which are linguistic also, which are really interesting. But there's no hard archaeological evidence of the Exodus. There's a lot of speculation, that if the text talks about 600,000 Jewish males of adult, of an age where they could be warriors. So that would lead to the total number of Israelites leaving Egypt of somewhere around 2 million. And, if you had that number of people leaving, it would take.
I know what you're about to say, and that's if they walked single file, which they probably did.
No, the calculation was like 8 across, but it would take months.
But
also, Stephen, hold on, please. But also, if there were a group of 2 million people in the desert, you would guess they would have left some evidence, animal bones, pottery, something. So the fact that there's no record is an important fact. Alan.
Oh, sorry. Speaking of Rabbi Wolfbeam, the point that he made, it probably was around the time that the conservative movement in its Torah commentary called Etzheim also makes the same kind of statement, correct?
I don't.
That
I'm not intimate. I mean, I have a copy of that commentary. I don't remember it making that
it has
statement.
a surprise, what appeared to be to me and others a surprising statement that makes it uncertain or even claims there's no evidence that the Exodus ever happened, which sounded from a more traditional.
But
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, without belaboring the point, saying
Okay.
there's no evidence doesn't say it didn't happen. It just says here's some evidence which you might expect. The other thing, you know, one of the Friedman points out the Sinai Desert is pretty big. And the kinds of surveys that are done is you get a couple of guys in a Jeep driving around looking for things. So you have this enormous expanse. And the fact that they didn't find anything, at least according to Friedman, is not terribly revealing. I mean,
And
that's his
very
opinion.
a lot. The Sphinx used to be mostly under is pretty big. It used to be almost most of it buried.
You have to start digging. And the question is, do you know where to dig? Okay, so I'm going to continue with this article. Um, so basically, the standard English translations all use the term Passover. My understanding is that the word Passover entered the English language. Well, no, because the King James version is like, well, I mean, they're translating it as Passover, but referring to the holiday as Passover is like the mid 1800s, and it was a Christian pastor that started using that term. Okay, two other verses in Exodus 12 are germane. Here's 12:23 in the same translation, and it says Pesach Adonai al Patach. So let's see how that's translated. Another verse, another use of the term Pasach. Whoa, it doesn't seem to have the English translations. I don't know why it doesn't have, but I didn't check once I printed this as a PDF. Looks like things got left out. I apologize. But again, it's being translated as Passover. So let's look at some more detailed commentary. Whoa, this did not work. Oh no, okay, it did work. Sorry. The King James translation, which 5 years ago celebrated its 400th anniversary, is the most influential English translation and has a strong effect on subsequent translation. The translation was based on the earlier translation by the scholar and theologian William Tyndale, who wrote the first complete English translation of the Bible. Tyndale is credited with introducing the word Passover into the English language. Okay, and this was copied by the King James version. Here's Tyndale's renditions. So I mean, it's first I thought it was gobbledygook, but it's Old English. So again, it's using the term Passover, and God will pass over the door, and it's the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, which passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, and so that's Tyndale's. Tyndale, what? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Since the plague was the firstborn were to die if, they didn't have the blood over the lentils, anybody left in Egypt would have to be second, third, fourth born, and etc. Correct?
Yes.
Well,
So the descendants of the Egyptians were descendants of people that were not the firstborn.
I would say that's the simple understanding of the story, including the animals, by the way. I think the firstborn of the
Yes.
animals even
I think
died.
it's only the firstborn males, though, not the. I don't think any of
I think that's right. I'm not certain, but I think you're right.
Okay.
Okay, so Tyndale was a learned man who knew Hebrew and Greek. In this rendition of Pesach as Passover, he was quite possibly influenced by David Kimchi, who's also called Radak, living 1160 to 1235, a renowned Hebrew grammarian and exegete. Exegete is one who interprets. whose work was well known in Christian Hebraist circles. In his dictionary, the Sefer HaShorashim, the Book of Roots, and by the way, when I'm talking about roots here, they're not talking about the TV show. The roots are every Hebrew word and verb has a 3-letter root. I actually have a dictionary of Hebrew roots as well. I don't think it's Radox, but so in his dictionary, he has a lengthy entry on the root Pesach. After listing the occurrences of the word, which means lame, he continues. I've never heard this before, but actually, if you look it up in a scholarly dictionary, it does mean lame. Similar to this is Adonai Pasach Adonai al hapatach. He will skip over the opening when he sees the blood, so the destroyer will not come. So here's the way this article is going. The article is going to say the word Pasach, which we usually mean as Passover, can mean to skip over, which isn't that big a deal, but it's also, we're going to see, it also means to protect. I think that's the word, but we'll see. Some of the other occurrences of the word Pasach may shed light on its meaning in the Exodus story. So Isaiah 51, boy, for some reason, it's just not in this article. Boy, I'm really upset about this. Wonder if I can find it. So, so that also talks about passing over. The King James Version sticks to the meaning of Passover, while the other two, I don't know if I can quickly find this. Let me just take a quick look at something. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Go back to, this is going to take me a second. I apologize. I think I'm going to pause the recording. So we're coming back to the article, but now we are all actually viewing it online. And you will see that in the early translations here, it uses the phrase Passover, and I'm trying to find where we were. So in Isaiah 31:5, so this is now not talking about the holiday of Passover. It's it's from the book of the prophet Isaiah. It says, from King James Version, as birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending also, he will deliver it, and passing over, he will preserve it. Okay, so that's King James Version. By the way, the King James Version typically is a very good translation and strives to preserve the original sense of the Hebrew. Sometimes it's uses thous and thee and stuff, but it's very good. But now look at the New Standard, I can't remember what it stands for, but the new JPS, which is certainly what our more modern books use. Like birds that fly, even so will the Lord of hosts shield Jerusalem, shielding and saving, protecting and rescuing. When the verb there is clearly pasoach. It's actually in a slightly different verb form, but it's the same root. So it's saying we find here a series of verbs that are more or less synonymous. The King James Version is the only one that sticks to the meaning of Passover for pasoach, while the other two learn the meaning from the context and translate it as spare and protect. So now suppose we apply that idea of sparing and protecting to the Exodus. If we look back on Exodus 12:27, we see one of these four verbs, hitzil, to save or spare, appears in the second half of the verse, while the verse pasach appears in the first. So I would argue that the correct meaning of Pesach in this context is spare or protect. This is actually relying on a very common thing we see in the Bible, where you'll have two phrases which sound repetitive, are just two different ways of saying the same thing. So he's translating, instead of God saying, when I see the blood, I will pass over, it says, when I see the blood, I will protect you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. And later on in Exodus, he will see the blood on the lintel and the doorpost, and the Lord will protect the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. And in Exodus 12:27, you will say it is a sacrifice of protection to the Lord, because he protected the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and saved our houses. The picture that emerges is one of God who has unleashed a destructive angel, the biblical equivalent of the rabbinic angel of death. Should point out, I'm glad he says rabbinic angel of death. The idea of an angel of death is not in the Bible at all. It is something that the rabbis add in Talmudic times. In Egypt, and God must take an active role in protecting the Israelites from this destructive force. The picture is clearest in verse 23. Let's see, verse 23, protecting the door, where God is portrayed as standing in front of the doors of the Israelite homes, preventing the destroyer from entering. Note the change in agency between 13 and 23. In the first one, God promises to protect the people from an unspecified plague, while in the latter, it is a destroying angel letting loose to do his work that God must protect the people from. Passing over the homes does not make sense in this context. The same in the other verses. Then the author is going to jump to the Septuagint. And just to remind you, the Septuagint, some of you were mentioning Greek, I think, as I was scrambling to try and get this text on our screen.
That was me trying to see if there was a Greek word for Passover.
Yeah. So here, this is going to be discussed. So this translation is called the Septuagint, and it's often referred to as the LXX, which is Roman for 70. And the myth, it is a sacred myth in Christianity. It's a myth I don't believe for a second, that basically, why do we have a Greek version of the Hebrew Bible? It's a Jewish translation. Why is there a translation into Greek? The same reason why we want to read translations into English. Many Jews in Hellenistic times were speaking Greek, so they wanted to have a translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And the myth is that they gave 70 individual scholars of Greek and Hebrew the Hebrew text, and they each wrote their Greek text, their Greek translation, and lo and behold, they were identical. So the theology, which certainly the Christian church relied on, is that you don't have to look at the Hebrew text at all. The Greek text is divinely inspired, and that's why they were all 70 translations were identical. So first Stephen and then Alan.
Okay. The Greek translation, though, while it's consistent between them, it's consistently wrong. There's a couple of things here and there that are incorrect in it, and all that they all made the same errors, or they all were divinely inspired to do it the same wrong way, or most likely they all had gone to the same schools and learned the same ways that it should be translated in order that were intentionally inaccurate for various reasons. Like,
can you give me an example?
Okay, the first one sequentially is God spoke and said, "Let us create the world or separate the sea or whatever." But which got translated in the singular because they didn't want to imply that there was more than one God. But anyways, what I'm getting at is that I think it's not so much a sign of divine inspiration as of that these people were all similarly educated and all kind of knew how it had been agreed ahead of time. Not that they conspired to do it, but that they'd all been taught how certain things should be translated or should be explained, and had all been taught the same things, and that's why they all gave the same consistency.
So I'll go one step further. I don't believe for a minute it ever happened.
Okay.
But basically, there is an issue in translation with which I am fascinated, and that is that you have to make choices. So if you have a phrase in Hebrew which says, "Let us make man in our image," and that doesn't seem to make sense, a translator may just change it to make it make more sense. And then there's other places where you simply have to come up with a Greek word. And so they, the Septuagint, because we don't have 70 different copies of the Septuagint, we have one. So, and the word choice is very important. I won't get into it because we'll never get off of it. But anytime you translate, you interpret. So whether it's deliberate or just they had to make a choice and they made the best choice. And I think that's still true when we read different translations. On Saturday morning of Torah, we come up with different translations and they have a difference. And a key issue is, are you translating for readability or are you translating for literal representation? I'm reminded, one of my favorite examples of this is not biblical, is when the Harry Potter series is translated into Hebrew for Israeli kids, when they have all these Christmas stories, and the Israeli kids wouldn't relate to Christmas stories, so the translator made them Hanukkah stories. Alan.
Harry Potter is not biblical?
Alan.
I was letting Stephen finish his point. When I know this from Monday night's class, the following thing I believe is true. The influence of Greece and in the translation of the Torah into Greek was during the period of the First Temple, correct?
Yes.
Because this connects.
No, because the First Temple was destroyed in 586. So right. I would say it's all Second Temple.
But
because the Hellenism is like 300 to 400 BCE, I think.
Okay, so
that would be Second Temple times. I'm not sure it makes a difference. But
the point that I'm still going to stay with connecting to the first period of First Temple is that when I looked up the fable that we talked about, the boy who cries wolf, it was designated as a Greek from Greece. The Aesop was a poet during the period of what was described as not 586 BC directly, but 580, 80 BC to 540. It was a 40-year interval that the scholars have identified when that story was created in Greece. So that's, since it struck me as, directly around the time of the destruction of First Temple, that was related to what we're talking about in the translation to Greek.
So I would say the significance here of this Greek translation is the Greek translation would reflect what the translators thought Pesach meant 2,000 years ago. So the Septuagint, the earliest extant Bible translation, beginning in 3rd century BCE, still retains what he's calling the proper understanding in 2 or 3 cases.
Well, that's well after the First Temple then. Okay.
Yeah, and the point is, in Greek, there are going to be different words for protecting and passing over.
What was the language of the, I'm sorry, cut you off.
Who's the what?
The language of the Romans. We know the language of the...
Presumably that was Latin later.
No, but even around the time the Romans occupied the Israel in the time of Jesus, and the Roman language was what?
Latin.
It was Latin then, even before Christianity? Okay.
I mean, my memory is fuzzy on that. It was a long time ago.
Just curious.
Okay. And the blood shall be for you a sign on the houses there where you are, and I will see the blood and I will protect you. But in 1223, it will pass by the door and not let the destroyer enter the house. And in 27, talks about protecting the houses of Israel. Let's see. One other little bit of evidence. We have a little bit of time. There's a Rabbi Elazar Keelier's, I'm not familiar with that, 6th, 7th century piyut. What is a piyut? A piyut is a poem that enters liturgy, and we have it a lot in our liturgy, piyutim. It's not in the Bible. Clearly, this is very late for the Bible. So it is a poem. God, you smote the firstborn on the guarded night of Passover. Mighty one, you protected Israelite firstborns with the blood of the paschal sacrifice, preventing the destroyer from entering our doors on Pesach so declare the Pesach feast. Context does not allow the word Pesachta as you passed over, because it would be you passed over the firstborn with the blood of the paschal sacrifice. It's clear that God here is understood as protecting. The blood that was smeared on the doorposts of the Israelites in Egypt was meant to protect the occupants of the house. This act is similar to that performed by Arabs, as related by Jausen when there's a cholera outbreak to preserve cattle in good health. Nice thing about reading this online is I can hover over it and look at the footnote. A single meaning of Pasach. We'll see how far we get. The problem in translating this term may come from the premise that all occurrences of the root must mean the same thing. We already have mentioned David Kimchi, who takes this position in Sefer HaShorashim. Rashi, in his gloss, remember Rashi is like 11th century, and exemplifies those commentators working with this premise. I will have pity. This resembles protecting and rescuing, in Isaiah, quote. But I say any occurrence of this is probably pasicha, has a connotation of skipping and jumping. He would skip from the homes of the Israelites to the home of the Egyptians, since they were intermingled. Similarly, in Kings, hopping between two opinions. Similarly, all lame people use the same root, go as if they are jumping. As it says in Isaiah, it makes them skip and save them from among the dead. So although Rashi mentions that Pasach might mean to have mercy or take pity on, citing Isaiah, he goes on to reject this interpretation and advocates the meaning of skip or jump. Rashi imagines God or his angel hopping around Egypt from house to house in order to carry out his mission. He brings as further corroboration, I'm just going to go a little further, the verse in 1 Kings with the prophets of Baal, a noun, Pesach, for a lame person who goes up and down as if walking or jumping on one leg. He finally returns to the verse in Isaiah and offers an entirely different connotation to cause to skip. Rashi assumes that there's only one meaning for Pasach, and therefore chooses the meaning of one text and interprets the other on this basis. The last comment, especially in Isaiah, seems forced. Rashi seems to have been influenced by 1 Kings. So I think his basic conclusion is that Pasach can mean protect, have mercy, or save. It can mean to hop, and it can mean the holiday of Passover. I would therefore suggest we stop using Passover to refer to our favorite spring holiday and just call it Pesach. I guess Pesach in Sephardic Hebrew and Pesach in Ashkenazi Hebrew or Yiddish. At least this way we won't be promoting a misunderstanding of the original meaning of this surprisingly enigmatic word. I'm going to stop sharing and we can discuss. I'm glad we actually got through this. Les. Oops. Yeah, unmute.
Unmute. Yeah, I'm a little confused because I thought the Israelites were in their own area, kind of cordoned off from the Egyptians, and here we are. They're living among them. They're skipping one house at Egyptians, and then Jews, and then Egyptians and Jews.
Yes.
That doesn't make sense.
Yes. So that's an excellent observation, and I hadn't thought about it. And so I think the biblical account says the Israelites were in Goshen, living apart. So you'd only need one big skip. I guess the question might be, were there also non-Israelites living in Goshen? They talk about a mixed multitude. So, but I don't know, but that's a reasonable observation. Paul.
Yes, just a simple question. Why are they 2 nights of Passover?
Why are there 2 nights of Passover? For the same reason we have 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah and an extra day of Sukkot and an extra day of Shavuot. And here's the answer. In ancient times, the beginning of each month, remember the Hebrew calendar are lunar months. So the first day of every month is the new moon. when there is no moon. So the night before that, you would see a thin crescent one way, then you'd have a new moon, and the night after, you would see a thin crescent the other way.
Right.
So the way it worked was, in ancient times, when they observed the new moon in Jerusalem, they would, presumably, I don't know, the Sanhedrin or a group of authorities, priests, would declare that the month had begun, and then started to get the word out to the rest of the community.
I see.
And it takes some time to get the word out, right? So here you are living in Alexandria, Egypt, far away from Jerusalem, and even though Pesach and most Jewish holidays occur on the full moon, so you have 2 weeks to get the word by messenger, and they would light bonfires that would get the word, but then people who were trying to interfere would light their own bonfires to try and mislead. So they developed a practice, not in Israel, but in the diaspora, of celebrating most holy days on 2 days to make sure you at least got it right once.
I see. Okay.
So in Israel, there's only one night of Seder, and Pesach is a 7-day holiday, not an 8-day holiday. And the Reform movement officially, I think, went with the idea of having these holidays be one day. But, I can't remember, was it Alan, you talking about the custom element of this? People like to have 2 Seders, one for his side of the family, one for her side of the family, one for the family, one for the community. So many Reform congregations will still have a second night Seder. But in Israel, it would only be one night. The only counterexample to that is make sure I get this right now. In Israel, I'm pretty sure I got this right. In Israel, there are 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah.
That's right. That's the one. I would have said the same thing. Right.
Yes.
It surprised me, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason is, once the new moon is discovered for Rosh Hashanah, it's Rosh Hashanah. It's the first day of the month. It's too late. You can't get the word out. You can't. It's a holy day. You can't light fires. You can't travel, and so on. So in Israel, they celebrate 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah. And theoretically, the Reform movement doesn't. I'm sorry if I stole your thunder, Alan.
No, I have a different subject.
Okay.
Thank you.
When it's my turn.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead.
it's my turn.
And
So
the counterexample is Yom Kippur, because you can't fast for 2 days in a row.
unless you're on an airplane at the wrong time of the world.
Well, yeah, I always tell the story of a guy I worked for who was an Israeli who was in Japan and was returning to probably the United States. I don't know if he was returning to the United States or Israel, on the day after Rosh Hashanah, but because he would be crossing the international date line, it would be, not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it would be Yom Kippur, and if he really kept it, he would have to fast for 2 days. And so he called his rabbi in Israel to ask him what to do, and they went back and forth and back and forth, and the final conclusion was stay in Japan an extra day. Alan.
This has to do with a holiday that I learned about today in my Hebrew class about Israel, and you'll know more because it's a Moroccan holiday called Mumana.
Mamuna.
Yeah,
right.
And so it's the day after the last day of Passover, the way it's celebrated, right?
It's at sunset on the last day of Passover. You now can eat chametz, right?
But it's not just eat. Apparently,
okay. I didn't finish the sentence. So in North Africa and certainly Morocco,
right,
they developed a custom of having a great celebration on the end of Passover. And the way Sonia tells it to me, the Arab neighbors would actually prepare the sweets and things because you can't have chametz in your house, so you couldn't cook, you couldn't prepare these sweets and cakes and things like that. So it was a wonderful sort of interfaith celebration. And we once did a mamuna at Temple Ner Ami in Camarillo that Sonia organized. and I think we even had a belly dancer. Yeah, yes, there is something called Memuna, and there's a controversy about where that name comes from. You know, the actual name for Moses um, for Rambam is Moshe ben Maimon. So one explanation is that it was in his time that Maimon developed this custom, and also there's a word for basically uh, not really riches, but money. So there was a thought that by celebrating this, you were wishing, for wealth. But
Why,
yeah,
why,
it's a great custom.
why didn't that ever get it? I know it's Sephardic / Moroccan, but it feels like it could have been adopted more widely.
But it wasn't, because remember, until fairly recently, people didn't jet set around the world. I had a very close Jewish friend who grew up in the South, and she said she had a custom on January 1st, New Year's Day, of eating black-eyed peas. And I never heard of that, so it didn't travel to New York. But I think the simplest explanation is that it just didn't travel. But now there are so many Moroccans in Israel that it has become popular in Israel.
Well, it reminds me, from what I've never been through the celebration, it's kind of like breaking the fast at the end of Yom Kippur, which is eating in
Yes,
general, but the
very
other
much so.
is kind of a community celebration. And as you said, ChatGPT also refers to the community collaboration between the Muslims and the Jews.
And Sonia said basically it was a big party, and the kids would go from house to house, and people would just visit their neighbors, and everyone would put out the spread. It was a wonderful celebration.
Let's
And
let's do it.
yeah,
April
yeah, yeah, yeah.
April 20th.
Yep. Okay, Stephen.
Um, Hanukkah is the same number of days everywhere, and Purim is actually longer in Jerusalem than it is here because
Yes, but not for any of those same reasons.
right. Now Shavuos in the Torah, it specifically says it's when it's to be is not a specific day of the year, but a certain number of days that you count from of the Omer. So there, you don't have to know when Rosh Chodesh Sivan was. You just need to know when Rosh Chodesh Nisan was. So it would seem as though this problem of
I agree with you, and I don't know. And there's a lot of Talmud about the uncertainty about how you count the Omer. But I'm pretty sure that in Israel, the only reason I know this is I've been in Israel a couple of times on Shavuot, and the Sabbath elevators. Oh, they had this. This is kind of interesting. So the question is, you're a diaspora Jew in Israel. Do you have one Seder or two? I know this has been bothering you all. And the answer is two. Sorry, Lois. The answer is two. You're supposed to celebrate according to your home custom. So I remember being in Israel on Shavuos and noticing that the Sabbath elevators kept running in Sabbath mode the day after Shavuot. And so I asked this question, and that's how I got the answer, that for the visitors from the diaspora, they would be accustomed to celebrating 2 days. Doesn't make any sense to me, but it doesn't have to make sense. Kind of like life. But that apparently is the custom and the rule. And then, yeah, well, anyway, I don't want to get on another tangent.
the Yom Kippur story would make more sense if it was some other fast day, because if it's Yom Kippur, the obvious answer is, well, you're not supposed to fly on Yom Kippur anyway for other reasons.
Oh, but he was waiting till Yom Kippur was over in Japan.
Oh, so he wasn't actually going to be flying during.
So actually, the problem was the international date line, which raises the question for me: does the international date line have significance on the Jewish calendar? And it must, because it's sunrise and sunset. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I was amused by the resolution.
there has to be a line somewhere. It doesn't have to be the same place.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
To add to this, I guess it would be the Shabbat elevator question. So looking at the calendar when I'm going to be in Israel, Shavuot in the evening, Erev Shavuot starts on Saturday night. So that means the elevator is starting at sundown on Friday, will run through Sunday, I guess. Shavuot is Sunday.
Yes.
So
Yeah. So you will have a Sabbath elevator. You'll have an elevator in the Sabbath mode throughout.
I won't be in a hotel, but I'm just trying to
Yeah. Yes.
interpret how the back-to-back, celebrations will take place. Yeah.
Yeah. And that actually, normally at the end of Saturday night, on a typical Saturday night, you would have Havdalah.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
And so, but now you're entering Pesach,
No,
and
Shavuot, Shavuot.
sorry?
You said
No,
Pesach.
no, but I'm
Oh,
talking about this Saturday.
even this
I'm
week.
talking
Yeah.
about this Saturday.
Yeah, right,
So
right.
the answer is, and I don't actually understand the logic of it necessarily, but you don't have the spices and you don't have the wine other than a traditional. Basically, you have an abbreviated Havdalah and you only have the candle. And you say, and you only have one blessing for Havdalah, and then the final blessing. So there's all kinds of rules that take place when you have situations like this. It'll
And,
take place on Shavuot, and it also is taking place, this weekend. And that's the reason why you're delayed till Thursday, you're not delayed. You can't do some stuff on Friday because it's inconsistent with preparing for Shabbat. I think I mentioned. Problem is, Friday night, what do you do for challah? Okay, here's another one I'm sure has been troubling you and you've been agonizing over.
Unless you were in class with you on Monday.
I'm sorry?
Unless you were in class with you on Monday.
Yes. So the reason you can't have challah Friday night is because you've done the search for chametz already on Thursday. So you can't have any chametz in your house. So the answer, sorry?
You eat egg matzah. You say
If you're Sephardic, and then I was reading actually Chabad's literature on Passover, and maybe it was something else with, how do you have macaroons and things that are kosher for Passover? And the answer is instead of mixing it with water, you mix it with fruit juice. But then the Ashkenazim are very stringent about that. Anyway, it makes you crazy. Which brings me to a song, of course. So let's see if I can do this with you.
When you said about Havdalah, it would have to be, and you still have the candle, it would have to be lit using an existing flame, though. You wouldn't be able to light
Really?
it.
Yeah, I've got that problem, and I don't know what the answer is. So whether you would have some kind of 24-hour flame that you would have lit Friday night. So I don't know what the answer is, but I agree that it's an issue. Okay. So I know you're all concerned about what you're supposed to eat and not eat on Passover, right? The correct response is yes. So fortunately, I have written a song on this subject. And the term kosher for Passover in Yiddish is Pesach. I don't know if most of you have probably heard that word. Okay, so here you go. Here's a handy little ditty to help you remember. Of course, remembering the ditty is even more problematic. Bagels and muffins and chocolate Oreos, spaghetti and pizza you order from Domino's, pies that are crusty and even ring-dings fall in the list of non-Pesach things. Fritos and Cheetos and Wheaties each morning, along with the Pop-Tarts and croissants we're scorning. Bye-bye to the donuts with sugar icing, all in the list of non-Pesach things. So for 8 days, we're all amazed with the matzah we eat, and looking forward until the ninth day and to the following treats, cupcakes and cheesecakes and forbidden Twinkies popcorn and peanuts and sugary drinkies, Danish and French toast, burritos so hot, and even next Friday, challah for Shabbat. So long matzah, so long X-lax, so long bowls of prunes. And for the next 357 days, I'm swearing off macaroons. I'm all here all week. Tell your friends.
Good.
By the way,
That's
on the
great.
subject of macaroons, I always hated macaroons. And then I realized the only time in my life I would ever have a macaroon was on Passover.
Of course.
I once tasted a macaroon that was, not kosher for Passover, and they're fine. Stephen, your hand is up. I don't know if you had something or it's just still up.
I didn't get the 357 days part doesn't make sense because it's not.
365 minus 8.
Yeah, I know that, but it's not a 365-day year.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're right. Right.
It's either a 300. It's
Asham nu, Bagad nu. But then I would be faced
Okay.
with the problem, Stephen. Am I writing this for a year that has an extra month, or a year? Should I put an asterisk in? It's
Like-
called comedy, Stephen. You're the first person in my long career to ever have noticed that, including me, by the way.
Rabbi, keep your day job.
Okay. Yes, I know. Okay. So thank you all. Next week we're
just-
continuing science on Monday, and we'll have the regularly scheduled article, which was about, I can't remember what it was about. Oh, Rashi, not Rashi, Maimonides and Nachmanides arguing about the role of sacrifice at the temple.
Rabbi, I have to compliment you in this following way. I know a lot of rabbis. I wasn't able to get to my contact list, but I probably have over 200 rabbi names in my contacts.
Wow.
But I can't think of anyone that has the combination of the skills of explaining physics related to religion and sing little interesting songs like you do. I know a lot of talented rabbis, but you're unique.
He broke the mold.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good.
I am humbled by your compliment. I really appreciate that. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Shalom.
Chag Sameach.
Yeah, Chag Sameach. Happy Pesach.
Yeah,
Pesach
Seder.
Sameach.